Can I start? Is it okay?
I thought you might like a little chortling to get you going.
Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star sports podcast, presented by
Underdog. I'm going to sing the song one of these days, but today's not that day.
Because it's a serious topic we're going to discuss.
It is a serious topic.
It's kind of serious, but it is. That was Vahe Gregorian. Sam McDowell is here, columnist for the Kansas City Star. I'm Blair Kirchhoff, and we're going to talk stadiums, future homes of the Chiefs and the Royals. So I got to thinking, why not just put a for sale sign out in front of Kauffman Stadium? You know, just put one of those Remax or Century 21 signs.
Everything must go.
Yes.
Some kind of concrete joke in here too to be had.
A lot of bathrooms, you know. A lot of advantages there, you know. And don't list it at $1 billion. List it at like 999 million.
You've got a real estate career just waiting for you.
We kid because we love, and these teams, it's getting pretty close to the end of a deadline, really, for the Chiefs and the Royals for new or renovated homes, because of the actions of the Missouri legislature. And of course, last week, the session in Missouri passed without the body taking action on new, or passing the tax that would fund 50% of a new stadium for the Royals and a renovative cost for the Chiefs. So Governor Mike Kehoe has called a special session of the Missouri legislature. They're going to go into session some point in the first half of June and discuss this matter. And Sam, we'll start with you because you most recently wrote about this. There were some complications to all this, but the state Senate and the state House will be back in session. They'll talk about the measure that was passed by the state House, but not the Senate in their regular session. What do we think is going to happen? What's the expectation? This is a big moment for Governor Mike Kehoe.
Yeah, no idea whether or not it'll get passed or not, to be honest. I mean, I think we've all learned in this topic not to predict what's going to happen. But, I mean, it seems like like you mentioned, he is going to call a special session for them to discuss this package that could fund up to half of the cost of a new or upgraded stadium for either team. And I think what this really speaks to is I've long cautioned people not to say they are going to Kansas or they are staying in Missouri until we see what the response from Missouri is going to be. And this is our first opportunity to really see what it's going to be. And what stood out listening to the House and the Senate debate this is the first opportunity for the people involved, like the people voting on this. It was their first opportunity to see what this plan's going to be. And that was even among the House, which passed it, I think, much more easily than some had anticipated. I think it was 106 to 40, maybe 108 to 40.
Right.
But what stood out is that a lot, even the people who voted for it said, I need to know more about this, though. I just got this dropped on my desk this morning. I just got a phone call last night that said we'd be debating this. And so as much as we were scrambling last week to decipher what this could mean for the teams, a lot of the people involved are as well, which is my guess why the Senate did not vote either way on this before adjourning their seasonal session. And therefore, Kehoe is saying, okay, if the timing of it is the issue, if there needs more time to digest the details of this, then we'll call people back for a special session, which I'm sure is not any of those senators' favorite thing to do, is to have their summer broken up and say, you got to come back in June while we discuss this huge project.
One of the things I was struck by in our coverage, and forgive me for not remembering which of the politicos said this, but it was something that reverberated back to what the problems were with the vote last year. There was a notion that they don't really know what they're voting for because it's tantamount to the teams wanting a blank check. because they don't know what the teams are committing.
Yeah.
Is that a fair appraisal, or is that?
I don't think it is, because what's important to remember in this is these projects would have to get individually approved by the state even if this passes. You still have to separately bring your project back for them to vote to say that you do qualify for this. And so in that sense, when that happens, you will certainly have to have much more fully fledged out details than what the teams have provided.
That's a great distinction, though. That, and again, something else I misunderstood in it is, I mean, this is to bring it to the possibility of doing it. It wouldn't be to. There's nothing to approve.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to approve, and also, by the way, this doesn't mean the teams would choose these options either. This doesn't.
Right.
This does not at all guarantee that the Chiefs would stay at Arrowhead Stadium. It just gives them the clearest picture of what their option would be, and maybe if the Senate doesn't pass it, it gives them the clearest picture that there isn't a state funding option in their minds. And the same, all the same is true for the Royals as well.
It's the Missouri answer to Kansas.
Attempted answer, yeah.
Yeah. And even the answer, if we're to take the numbers at face value, doesn't match the Kansas offer, right? They're talking. The Missouri offer would be for 50% of the cost. That would be the state funding for the cost
up to
50%, and on the Kansas side, assuming it can come about, they're talking about 70%,
75.
funding 70% of.
Vahe and I have had separate conversations with people that really put doubt into Kansas's ability to come anywhere close to that number. So you're right that though that is a very clear distinction in these two bills. In practicality, I think they're similar proposals actually.
Okay. Well, but either one, local money will have to be involved as well. What we're talking about is state money that would come from either the state of Missouri or the state of Kansas. But that means that's not all of it, right?
Yeah.
There'd have to be some Jackson County money if the teams stay here, or if the Royals go north of the river.
Yeah,
Clay County money.
And it's not just, that's a really important point, because it's not just the team's preference, it's outright stated in the bill that was, by the way, an amendment to the Clay County proposals to create a sports complex authority that's similar to what Jackson County has. So yeah, it's an absolute requirement that they have it. And I've had enough conversations that I know for a fact the Chiefs would go to another vote in Jackson County. It would be separate from the Royals. We haven't heard that would be a component for the Royals. I even my own reporting, I haven't been told that the Royals have settled on that being definitively an absolute requirement for them, but it is part of the bill. So if you go to Clay County, what would that look like? I don't think you could pass a full sales tax in Clay County. So what other things could you get to have a local source of funding? And Mayor Lucas said last week, he told us that he had just had productive conversations with the Royals about moving downtown, which gets back that the center of this argument, or this conversation, I should say, would remain true. We still would not know where the Royals are going, where they even would want to go if this passes. We just would know that there'd be a source of funding for whatever their final selection would be. The Chiefs, I think we could say, if they stay in Missouri, it's overwhelmingly likely we're talking about them renovating Arrowhead Stadium. But the Royals, I still think, is a pretty big shoulder shrug as far as what that would mean for them.
And perhaps putting a practice facility at Arrowhead?
I don't know if it'd be at Arrowhead, but that was a piece of the bill that I didn't anticipate. And I had talked to people over the weekend about what this could entail, and none of them had mentioned it. And I think it's a pretty important component that it requires any team using this to keep all of its headquarters and training facilities in the state as well. So that's Missouri saying, we'll give you something, but the taxable employees and all that is going to be in Missouri as well, which is, I think we all anticipate that any Chiefs training facility complex at least has the potential, if not the likelihood, to include training camp as well, which is right now in St. Joseph. So obviously a lot of elected officials see that as a potential moneymaker as opposed to just 8 to 10 home dates a year. And this would require them to stay in Missouri. And look, I know for a fact that the Chiefs have looked hard at different sites in Kansas for their training facility, but whether or not that means it's State Arrowhead or, if Clay County is creating a sports complex authority, that's certainly a potential option as well. I mean, nothing in the bill would prevent them from going to North Kansas City if that's what they wanted to do.
It's almost like anything could happen.
Yeah.
Well, it just seems to me there are a lot of unanswered questions for an issue to which there's a deadline. That it's, and by end of June, which is when the Kansas Star bonds could expire. I guess there's an ability to extend them, but at least Missouri is operating on the premise that that's why they're calling a special session for June before the Kansas Star bonds expire. And the other thing is just it's a matter of, if you start adding up the years, think about this: that the bonds for the Truman Sports Complex were passed in June of 1967. Groundbreaking was in July of 1968. The stadium, the Arrowhead opened in 1972, and Royal Stadium then 1973. So four or 5 years after groundbreaking at the Truman Sports Complex, we're right there. I mean, in terms of where we are now on the calendar and when the lease expires for the Royals and the Chiefs at the Truman Sports Complex, this kind of has to get done now. They got to get going on this.
Especially the Royals. I mean, the Chiefs, if they ultimately choose a renovation project, that can happen simultaneously as you're playing at the stadium. And
it took them only 3 years to renovate. I say only, but after they passed the renovation in, was it 06?
Yeah.
I think they opened in 09. It was open in 09.
That would be only, just because, relatively speaking, that's quick. And that's why I say, particularly with the Royals, is just because the quickest I've heard any baseball stadium being built is 4 years. So when you backtrack from that, to your point, Blair, your lease runs through the 2030 season.
Right.
That's 20.
It doesn't include the 31 season. Because the lease expires, I think, in January
starts
31.
in 2030. So the Chiefs would bleed into 2031 naturally. But, yeah, I mean, so the Royals, I think, are probably a year away from absolutely, and that's giving them the benefit of the doubt of executing everything on time afterwards. And they haven't earned that benefit of the doubt to assume that everything's going to be happens at a quick pace. So, like, we're up against it with that. And I'll point out in relation to that conversation that it's the one thing a year ago at this time that I did not understand Frank White's argument that it was too early. And on the one hand, like, when are you ever punished for doing something too early, especially something ambitious like that? And the other point is, it's not. It's like, we're seeing why it was not too early because of everything you just mentioned. Like, we're running up against certain dates now.
Tell me how you guys feel about this too. I wonder, just by virtue of the fact that the World Cup is here next year, how much that's going to muddle the picture about anything going on in terms of people wanting to get legislation done or trying to, make dramatic decisions and changes amid all that. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like that's going to be the kind of thing that's so looms so over everything else going on that it's going to be hard to get stuff decided or done or legislated in 2026. Now, maybe that's just a false construct, but I have this feeling that's going to be way more in our front grills, their front grills, than maybe anybody realizes, and I think it might tie some hands if they don't get it done before then.
I don't think it'll impact the Royals much, and if we're talking about the Chiefs staying at Arrowhead, then the Chiefs are obviously having to work with the stadium renovation now, just for just to make it soccer compliant.
Right.
And so after 2026, I think the Chiefs could begin a renovative project to get Arrowhead, fixed up for 2031 football season. What they can't do, though, is level Kauffman Stadium at that point, which is part of what we're talking about. Right. And for the Chiefs to create space out there, I'd like to know more about that timing.
Yeah.
The demolition of Kauffman Stadium, and how the Chiefs are going to renovate, with that being part of their renovated plans.
Yeah, I think that's astute. I think I guess I just find myself picturing like sort of the, for lack of a better term, drama over everything that might gridlock politicians and such with that occupying so much space. But, we'll see.
Well, you talk about drama. There was some in the Missouri Statehouse this past week. Let's go back to that for a second. As you said, Sam, the tax passed the House, but it wasn't going to pass in the Senate, and even some Kansas City senators said they would not have voted for it. And this is where it gets a little complicated because there was just the way things work in the State House in Jefferson City. There was is it a $500 million or $513 million package for improvements, capital improvements for hospitals, the mental health facility here in Kansas City, for other projects that basically was taken off the table, and so Kansas City, including Barbara Washington, the senator from Kansas City, the Democrat, said she would not have voted for. She wants the Royals and the Chiefs to stay and wants them to be happy, but she wouldn't have voted for it without more discussion, without a little bit more lead time to consider, the package for the Royals and the Chiefs, and even Governor Kehoe throwing his endorsement, kind of late in the game. He wasn't behind this until the week of the end of the session. So it's not just calling a special session doesn't mean it's going to happen. Everything I read, and we're not political writers, but everything I read was Mike Kehoe had a good first year with the Missouri legislature. But if he doesn't get this done with his full endorsement, it doesn't look good for him. It really doesn't look good for Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, he's sticking his neck out there early into his term. That I think, to your point, there's a lot of interesting just politics and political strategy that this is being tied into, which, look, I mean, when you ask for this sum of money from the state, and I recognize it's technically not the Chiefs and Royals that are seeking this ask, but we know it certainly has their endorsement, but you do get mixed up into the world of politics, which in this case in Missouri, and the timing of this has really, really important issues that, frankly, they are more important than stadium issues. So what we saw last week was not at all surprising to our political reporters that have been thoroughly covering this, like Jonathan Shorman and Kason Bayless, that, people are angry about the result of one bill and not at all inclined to bend and move on another because of it.
Go ahead, Blair.
I was going to ask you, Vahe, do you find it interesting that the Royals have been somewhat quiet about this after initially, with their listening tour and their comments leading up to the vote last April, doing their sales job, but really it's been difficult to get any kind of information out of the Royals, including a location for a preferred location for the stadium. I don't know. I know we've tried to talk to John Sherman about it.
It has surprised me a little bit in the sense that they certainly at least were accessible to be asked about it and not say much for a while, right? I mean, at least periodically they seem to hold press conferences about this or that and some other element of it, and that's really not been the case. I suppose, we've asked them a couple different times about what lessons were learned from the first go-round and how they got clobbered in the vote. I suppose something they haven't said out loud, but that they probably feel is like, well, we don't need to share so much till we really know what we're doing. But part of the big problem, if you look back, there were so many missteps. It's really unfortunate. But the thing that I still can't really account for, that there was just such a fly in everything that they did, was the announcing of two finalist sites, and then 7 or 8 months later, it becoming a third site and with no real.
That's the one we mean.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
that's the one really.
But with no real explanations along the way, unless I'm forgetting something. I mean, it was just it's going to be a little longer. It's going to be a little longer, and I very much could be wrong about this, but there's a part of me that thinks if they had decided on the crossroads spot in August and had 8 months to massage through those scenarios and really
campaign
talk
for
to
it.
people, properly campaign, make sure they could appease people more thoroughly, truly talk to everybody, maybe it would have worked out. But I agree with that point, Blair, and I know Sam's asked John these questions. I think the last time I remember speaking to John about it might have been opening day, John Sherman, and I think the question was along the lines of, what is it you need to know that you don't know now? And it probably was not a properly asked question, because I think he was able to easily just kind of move past it.
Well, that ties back into this topic. Like, this is what they need to know. Like, they've got to know what funding they're getting, how the economics of the projects would work, and that's true of John Sherman and Clark Hunt. And it is why I said at the onset of this conversation that all this speculation about where these two teams going never made sense to me until we knew what Missouri was going to try and put on the table for them, and it is prevented it from them. And that's actually an understandable part to me as well. Is let's see what Missouri does first before we take this opportunity in Kansas, because money does drive these decisions. But you didn't know what the money was going to be for Missouri, and until the special session's called, we don't know what it's going to be yet either.
One of the things, Sam, and you referred earlier to conversations we've had with experts, and one of the points recently made to us was, in the past we might have seen the Royals or Chiefs be more specific about what they're willing to put up first. Yeah. And I think it's a good point, but I think the point you're making is equally good. Where is it chicken and egg on this?
I totally agree with that point. Learning what Missouri can provide does not prevent you from saying what you can contribute. And we did see the Chiefs say that they were going to put forth, was it $300 million in an $800 million renovation project. By the way, 2 years later, those numbers would go up with construction costs, and I would anticipate that therefore the Chiefs' numbers would go up. It may be a similar percentage, though.
Yeah, so what's that, 37.5%?
Yeah.
3 out of 8.
So if you see $900 million, maybe you're putting up $350 or something like that instead. The Royals, I don't think ever got that specific with, even behind the scenes and conversations with people. And I know for a fact that was a frustration of some entities that would be supplying those finances to them. Was
I wrong to think that the Royals were going to contribute $1 billion and they wanted $1 billion from state and local?
So they'd initially said that they would be paying for the bulk of the stadium.
That's right, the bulk of the stadium.
And
that term is used.
All of the
ballpark district. And the former, I don't think, ever materialized in conversations.
Okay.
The latter, I still think, was a piece of it, that they would be paying for. But does that mean you really pay for it because you're getting incentives and tax breaks and some land breaks on stuff? I mean, it's the argument I always have at the current stadium. Was it really fully paid for by the owners when you get the land provided for you and everything? It's not. I mean, it's still a great investment, and Kansas City should be grateful for those ownership investments, but it's not entirely free to the city either.
Take a swing at picking sports this baseball season with Underdog. Playing on their app is as easy as choosing higher or lower on players' stats. Get them right, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. Sign up today using promo code KCSTAR to get a gimme pick as a part of your first cash entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus credits when you deposit. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org.
Our little trifecta here is somewhat representative of the metro as a whole. We have Missouri residents, Kansas resident. If Jesse was here, it'd be plural. Does it matter where in the metro area the teams call home?
So I think that's going to be a really hard argument. That question was brought up in the House debate, even where it passed, which is, if it's... I've always thought it's been a flaw in the economic presentations that, the teams have presented, and therefore, we saw, a coincidentally very similar economic study that was presented at the House, and that was a question that was asked. Well, aren't we just talking 20 miles down the road? Because it's not like Kansas City Missourians cease to become Chiefs fans if this moves across the border, in which case if part of the economics are that you're getting bars filled up on Sundays, and even one example specifically about, I can't remember what place it was, packed on Super Bowl Sunday, like that stuff would still happen. Doesn't mean you'd have the same workforce, of course, in your state, and so those economics would change. I think fundamentally the teams need to stop making this an economic argument, because there are way too many studies that show that is not on your side. And I think the vote should tell them that was not bought either. The voters did not buy that argument, in which case they need to make this, to me, it's going to sound like somebody who's jotted down notes to perhaps write something on this, but I think Kansas City is such a prideful town. You should make your argument about that pride of having these teams, and they've never done that. It's always been about the economics, about the fear-mongering of losing these teams, and they've missed out, I think, on what makes Kansas City, which is the pride. There's pride here about having these teams, and that's not been part of these campaigns.
I'll give you the visual. I tell this to people, friends from different parts of the country. This is the only place I know where Kansas Cityans from both states proudly wear a shirt with a heart and KC in it, their hometown shirt, just because they love being from here.
Yeah.
I
mean, there was like the joke that the I Love New York shirts are not actually worn by
New Yorkers.
They're worn by tourists who go and buy them. Right. Here in Kansas City, they're worn by Kansas City.
Kansas City.
Right.
In Kansas City, yes.
Need I remind you, I'm here.
Right. Virginia is for lovers, says the guy from Texas. No, it's I'm amazed by that. I think it's cool. I think it says a lot about who we are and our kind of a heart of America pride.
I totally agree, and I think the Chiefs and Royals are absolutely woven into that fabric,
no doubt.
And they, more than anyone, should be able to recognize that.
So, just to clarify, because I'm of the mind that part of the way that fabric's worked is the way that history has perpetuated itself by being Kansas City, Missouri. Do you guys feel like that's not really necessarily pertinent, because if it's in the region, it still has the same vibe?
I've tried to separate like my selfish thoughts of wanting the teams closer to me for work-wise, and the fact that I go to the Royal Stadium when they're in town 3 or 4 nights a week. We're at Chiefs at least 4 days a week. Yep. Sometimes 5 days in a week. I've tried to separate that from that's by far my primary motivation for just hoping that somehow they wind up in Missouri. But like from an economic standpoint, from a pride standpoint, I mean, they're in Kansas City still. I do think it would. Some people would feel differently about that, though. I mean, I do. That question that I mentioned, that when Blair brought that up, that I said that was brought up, the response was not that it does matter they're in Missouri. Because this was a St. Louis representative that brought it up. The response to that St. Louis representative was, what would you feel like if the Cardinals just moved across the border to Illinois? And the guy said, that's a good point.
Yeah, touche. Right?
I wouldn't like that. And so that resonated as somebody who even doubted that this mattered at all. And I do think that part would resonate with a lot of people that are used to having these teams. But I mean, look, Johnson County gets over it and they come to the games in mass numbers.
How about you as the resident?
Well, as a little interesting point of geography, where I live, my home address, I'm closer to the Truman Sports Complex than I am the Legends. So, it's all about me and my convenience. But no, because I guess Vahe, you and I are the two people in this conversation who aren't from here originally.
Yeah.
I don't care where they are as long as they're in my metro area. I want them in my. I don't want them to leave, the heart of America.
Yeah.
And that includes Kansas and Wyandotte on the Kansas side, or Johnson County and Wyandotte County on the Kansas side.
You mentioned what you thought was which one's closer to you, and I did the same. I actually think a lot of people are responding the way they are for that reason too. They go to the games.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's easy for me to get to a Royals game because I live in this spot. Or if you're in Kansas, man, I sure would go to a lot more games because it'd be easier for me to get to if they were in this spot. I think a lot of people respond selfishly to that question. I don't have any problem with that. I'm just saying, I think a lot of people are thinking about what's best for me in this situation because they do consider the whole thing to be Kansas City. It's just where in Kansas City. It's no different than picking where you're going to live.
Well, what I want a baseball stadium downtown. I want the Chiefs to move to Legends because I want the dome. I want the retractable roof that we see in Houston and Dallas and places like that because I want it to be used year round. I want to see a possible Super Bowl and Final Four and indoor concerts in the winter, and I just think that's the best scenario for the Chiefs. It's selfish. It's what I want. I don't know if the Chiefs think that's best for them. I think you can build around it, but you're landing at the Legends, landing in a spot that has plenty of commercialization. You can add to that, but I'd like to see baseball downtown. Maybe right outside our window here where we're recording.
I'd like to see it downtown too. I mean, maybe I'm influenced by having lived in St. Louis, with it downtown. Although it's an interesting thing, it's a whole other discussion that St. Louis's downtown is not done well. I mean, it's not like that's a thriving downtown. On the day of a baseball game, right around the stadium for square mile or two, it's pretty cool, but hasn't made downtown be what it might ought to be.
All right, is Jack Caglione going to succeed at AAA?
Why not?
Why wouldn't he, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the ladder, and I'd say it's reasonable to suggest he dominated. Double A.
322, 9 home runs,
41 RBIs,
43 RBIs, 38 games.
I think what really stood out to me was the Royals lineup at the major leagues over the last 3 days against St. Louis, which was, even though Michael Massey was in the lineup, suddenly Jonathan India was playing second base, which he doesn't play left field or second base particularly well. But now you had Michael Massey out in left field for the first time on something they practiced in spring training. We heard he was going to play it. He never did. He was a regular second base. Now suddenly he's getting time in left field. And to me, I'm reading between the lines here, but it seems like the thought is our best lineup, if we have to make a change, includes a change in left field. So the best hitter is going to be playing second base now. And Jack Caglione's been playing not only right field, but left field now in the minor leagues. And that tells me that there could be a faster track than the Royals had initially envisioned going into this season, and they're already preparing for what that track would look like in the major leagues, not just in AAA.
As recently as about 2 weeks ago, and I talked to Matt Quatrero about some lineup construction stuff, and I asked him about why they did Massey in spring training, but he hasn't been out there, and why is India always third and left instead of ever at second? And he said they were trying to basically keep people to two positions and keep it simple. There was no inference that this was going to come. So I think that speaks to your theory a little bit. I was out of town last week and missed it if it was spoken about, but did Matt Quatrero or JJ speak a little bit at length on finally putting Massey in left? So anyway, it's a departure from something that they had kind of built into their makeup. And I think that theory is pretty sound, Sam.
Okay, we've got plenty of time to talk about Jack Caglione in the outfield for the Storm Chasers, and maybe, who knows, in Kansas City in a few weeks. We'll have to see. All right, as Sam mentioned a couple of weeks ago, great conversation as always. when he Wally pipped me. Big thanks to our producers, Monty Davis and Randy Mason, and to our editors, Jeff Rosen and Scott Chasen. Always a great conversation with Vahe, Gregorian, and Sam McDowell. We'll do it again soon on SportsBeat KC, presented by Underdog.